For the second day in a row, we're going to be listening to some Tchaikovsky. Today we are getting back into Funkin' Wagnall's family library of great music. This is album number 2, which focuses on Tchaikovsky. And album number 1 from this series was Beethoven's Sixth Symphony. That's a tongue twister. Sixth Symphony. Today is Tchaikovsky's Sixth Symphony. And I don't even know if I'm pronouncing this right, but the Pathétique, it just sounds like pathetic to me. But so yeah, that's side 1 and side 2. I do wish, we've got the 2 records from this series, and it says includes stereo recording right here, but also biography and program notes. And on the back, I don't know if you can see this at all, but it has a picture of what the biography and program notes book would look like. I really wish I had those. That'd be pretty cool to follow along whilst listening to this record. But since we don't have those program notes, we're going to read Star Wars. So let me get the music going, and we're going to get into this. Cheers, my friends. So we left off yesterday. The rebels had already begun their assault on the Imperial battle station. The first wave is about to head in, and the second wave is trying to draw fire away from the first wave as they approach their target. So let me just... Luke grinned as he pulled up and away from the surface as intense lines of energy passed through the space recently vacated. Damned if it wasn't like hunting womp rats back home in the crumbling canyons of Tatooine's wastes. Biggs followed Luke on a similar run, even as Imperial pilots prepared to lift clear of the station. Within the many docking bays, technical crews rushed hurriedly to unlock power cables and conclude desperate final checks. More care was taken in preparing a particular craft nearest one of the bayports, the one into which Darth Vader barely succeeded in squeezing his huge frame into. Once set in the seat, he slid a second set of eye shields across his face. The atmosphere of the war room back in the temple was one of nervous expectancy. Occasional blinks and buzzes from the main battle screen sounded louder than the soft susurration of hopeful people trying to reassure one another. Near a far corner of the mass flickering of lights, a technician leaned a little closer to his own readouts before speaking into the pickup suspended near his mouth.
Squad leaders! Attention, squad leaders! Attention! We've picked up a new set of signals from the other side of the station. Enemy fighters coming your way.
Luke received the report at the same time as everyone else. He began hunting the sky for the predicted Imperial craft, his gaze dropping to his instrumentation. My scope's negative. I don't see anything. Maintain visual scanning, Blue Leader directed. With all this energy flying, they'll be on top of you before your scope can pick them up. Remember, they can jam every instrument on your ship except your eyes. Luke turned again, and this time saw an Imperial already pursuing an X-Wing with a number Luke quickly recognized. Biggs! He shouted. You've picked one up! On your tail! Watch it! I can see it, came his friend's panicked response. Where is he? I can't see it. Luke watched helplessly as Biggs' ship shot away from the station's surface and out into clear space, closely followed by the Imperial. The enemy vessel fired steadily at him, each successive bolt seeming to pass a little closer to Biggs' hull. He's on me tight, the voice sounded in Luke's cockpit. I can't shake him. Twisting, spinning, Biggs looked back toward the battle station, but the pilot trailing him was persistent and showed no sign of relinquishing pursuit. Hang on, Biggs, Luke called, wrenching his ship around so steeply and straining gyros whined. I'm coming in. So absorbed in his pursuit of Biggs was the Imperial pilot that he didn't see Luke, who rotated his own ship, flipped out of the concealing gray below, and dropped in behind him. Electronic crosshairs lined up according to the computer readout instructions, and Luke fired repeatedly. There was a small explosion in space, tiny compared with the enormous energies being put out by the emplacements on the surface of the battle station. But the explosion was of particular significance to 3 people: Luke, Biggs, and most particularly to the pilot of the TIE fighter, who was vaporized with his ship. "Got him," Luke murmured. "I've got one! I've got one!" came a less restrained cry of triumph over the open intercom. Luke identified the voice as belonging to a young pilot known as John D. Yes, that was Blue 6 chasing another Imperial fighter across the metal landscape. Bolts jumped from the X-Wing in steady succession until the TIE fighter blew in half, sending leaf-like glittering metal fragments flying in all directions. "Good shooting, Blue 6, the squadron leader commented. Then he added quickly, "Watch out, you've got one on your tail." Within the fighter's cockpit, the gleeful smile on the young man's face vanished instantly as he looked around, unable to spot his pursuer. Something flared brightly nearby, so close that his starboard port burst. Then something hit even closer, and the interior of the now open cockpit became a mass of flames. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" That was all he had time to scream before oblivion shook him from behind. Far above and to one side, Blue Leader saw John D's ship expand in a fiery ball. His lips may have whitened slightly. Otherwise, he might as well have never seen the X-Wing explode for all the reaction he displayed. He had more important things to do. On the fourth moon of Yavin, a spacious screen chose that moment to flicker and die, much as John D had. Worried technicians began rushing in all directions. One turned a drawn face to Leia, the expectant commanders, and one tall bronzed robot.
"The high-band receiver has failed. It will take some time to fix."
"Do the best you can," Leia snapped. "Switch to audio only." Someone overhead, and in seconds, the room was filled with the sounds of distant battle, interspersed with the voices of those involved. Tighten it up, Blue Tube, tighten it up," Blue Leader was saying. "Watch those towers." "Heavy fire, boss," came the voice of Wedge Antilles. 23 degrees. "I see it. Pull in, pull in. We're picking up some interference." "I can't believe it," Biggs was stammering. "I've never seen such firepower." Pull in, Blue 5, pull in." A pause. Then, "Luke, do you read me? Luke." "I'm all right, Chief," came Luke's reply. "I've got a target. I'm going back to check it out." "There's too much action down there, Luke," Biggs told him. "Get out. Do you read me, Luke? Pull out." "Break off, Luke," ordered the deeper tones of Blue Leader. "We've hit too much interference here. Luke, I repeat, break off. I can't see him. Blue 2, can you see Blue 5? "Negative," Wedge replied quickly. "There's a fire zone here you wouldn't believe. My scanner's jammed. Blue 5, where are you? Luke, are you all right?" "He's gone," Biggs started to report solemnly. Then his voice rose. "No, wait. There he is. Looks like a little fin damage, but the kid's fine." Relief swept the war room, and it was most noticeable in the face of the slightest, most beautiful senator present. On the battle station, troopers worn half to death or deafened by the concussion of the big guns were replaced by fresh crews. None of them had time to wonder how the battle was going, and at the moment, none of them much cared or shared the malady shared by common soldiers since the dawn of history. Luke skimmed daringly low over the station's surface, his attention riveted on a distant metal projection. "Stick close, Blue 5, the squadron commander directed him. "Where are you going?" "I've picked up what looks like a lateral stabilizer," Luke replied. "I'm going to try to go for it." "Watch yourself, Blue 5. Heavy fire in your area." Luke ignored the warning as he headed the fighter straight toward the oddly shaped protrudence. His determination was rewarded when, after saturating it with fire, he saw it erupt in a spectacular ball of super-hot gas. "Got it!" he exclaimed, continuing south for another one. Within the rebel temple fortress, Leia listened intently. She seemed simultaneously angry and frightened. Finally, she turned to 3PO and muttered, "Why is Luke taking so many chances?" The tall droid didn't reply. "Watch your back, Luke," Biggs's voice sounded over the speakers. "Watch your back. Fighters above you, coming in." Leia strained to see what she could only hear. She wasn't alone.
"Help him, R2,
3PO was whispering to himself.
"and keep holding on."
Luke continued his dive, even as he looked back and spotted the object of Biggs's concern close on his tail. Reluctantly, he pulled up and away from the station surface, abandoning his target. His tormentor was good, however, and continued closing on him. "I can't shake him," he reported. Something cut across the sky toward both ships. I'm on him, Luke, shouted Wedge Antilles. Hold on. Luke didn't have to wait for very long. Wedge's gunnery was precise, and the TIE fighter vanished brightly shortly thereafter. Thanks, Wedge, Luke murmured, breathing a little more easily. Good shooting, Wedge. That was Biggs again. Blue 4. I'm going in. Cover me, Porkins. I'm right with you, Blue 3, came the other pilot's assurance. Biggs leveled them off, then let go with full weaponry. No one ever decided exactly what it was he hit, but the small tower that blew up under his energy bolts was obviously more important than it looked. They referred to somebody as Piggy yesterday, and I'm wondering if that's the same person as Porkins. We're going to find out. A series of sequential explosions hopscotched across a large section of the battle station's surface, leaping from one terminal to the next. Biggs had already shot past the area of disturbance, but his companion, following slightly behind, received a full dose of whatever energy was running wild down there. I've got a problem, Porkins announced. My converter's running wild. That was an understatement. Every instrument on his control panel had abruptly gone berserk. Eject! Eject, Blue 4, advised Biggs. Blue 4, do you read? I'm okay, Porkins replied. I can hold her. Give me a little room to run, Biggs. You're too low, his companion yelled. Pull up! Pull up! With his instrumentation not providing proper information, and at the altitude he was traveling, Porkins' ship was simple for one of the big, clumsy gun emplacements to track. It did as its designers had intended, and it should. Porkins' demise was as glorious as it was abrupt. It was comparatively quiet near the pole of the battle station. So intense and vicious had been Blue and Green Squadron's assault on the equator that Imperial resistance had concentrated there. Red Leader survived the false peace with mournful satisfaction, knowing it wouldn't last for long. Blue Leader, this is Red Leader, he announced into his mic. We're starting our attack run. The exhaust port is located and marked. No flak, no enemy fighters up there, yet looks like we'll get at least one smooth run at it. I copy, Red Leader, the voice of his counterpart responded. We'll try to keep him busy down here. 3 Y-wing fighters dropped out of the stars, diving toward the battle station surface. At the last possible minute, they swerved to dip into a deep, artificial canyon, one of the many streaking the northern pole of the Death Star. Ooh, first Death Star reference. Metal ramparts raced past on 3 sides of them. Red Leader hunted around, noticed the temporary absence of Imperial fighters. He adjusted a control and addressed his squadron. This is it, boys. Remember, when you think you're close, go in closer before you drop that rock. Switch all power to front deflector screens. Never mind what they throw at you from the side. We can't worry about that now. Imperial crews lining the trench rudely awoke to the fact that their heretofore ignored section of the station was coming under attack. They reacted speedily, and soon energy bolts were racing at the attacking ships in a steady, increasing volume. Occasionally, one would explode near one of the onrushing Y-wings, jostling it without real damage. A little aggressive, aren't they? Red 2 reported over his mic. Red Leader reacted quietly. How many guns do you think, Red 5? Red 5, known casually to most of the rebel pilots as Pops, somehow managed to make an estimate of the trench's defensive, while simultaneously piloting his fighter through the growing hail of fire. His helmet was battered, almost to the point of uselessness, from the effects of more battles than anyone had a right to have survived. I'd say about 20 emplacements, he finally decided. Some in the surface and some on the towers. Red Leader acknowledged the information with a grunt as he pulled his computer targeting visor down in front of his face. Explosions continued to rock the fighter. Switch to targeting computers, he declared. Red 2, came one reply. Computer locked in, and I'm getting a signal. The young pilot's rising excitement marked his reply. But the senior pilot among all the rebels, Red 5, was expectantly cool and confident, though it didn't sound like it from when he murmured half to himself. No doubt about it. This is going to be some trick. Unexpectedly, all defensive fire from the surrounding emplacements ceased. An eerie quiet clung to the trench as the surface continued to blur past the skimming Y-wings. "What's this?" Red 2 blurted, looking around worriedly. "They've stopped. Why?" "I don't like it," growled Red Leader. But there was nothing to confuse their approach now, no energy bolts to avoid. It was Pops who was first to properly evaluate this seeming aberration on the enemy's part. "Stabilize your rear deflectors now. Watch for enemy fighters." "You pinned it, Pops," Red Leader admitted, studying a readout. "Here they come. 3 marks at 210. A mechanical voice continued to recite the shrinking distance to their target, but it wasn't shrinking fast enough. "We're sitting ducks down here," he observed nervously. "We'll just have to ride it out," the old man told them all. "We can't defend ourselves and go for the target at the same time." He fought down old reflexes as his own screen revealed 3 TIE fighters in precision formation, diving almost vertically down toward them. 3, 8, 1, 4, Darth Vader announced as he commonly adjusted his controls. The stars whipped past him from behind.
"I'll take them myself. Cover me."
Red 2 was the first to die, the young pilot never knowing what hit him. Never seeing his executioner despite his experience, Red Leader was on the verge of panic when he saw his wingman dissolve in flame. "We're trapped down here. No way to maneuver. Trench walls are too close. We've got to loosen it up somehow. "Stay on target," admonished an older voice. "Stay on target." Red Leader took Pops' words like tonic, but it was all he could do to ignore the closing TIE fighters as the 2 remaining Y-wings continued to streak toward the target. Above them, Vader permitted himself a moment of undisciplined pleasure as he readjusted his targeting computer. The rebel craft continued to travel a straight, unevasive course. Again, Vader touched finger to fire control. Something screeched in Red Leader's helmet, and fire started to consume his instrumentation. "It's no good!" he yelled into his pickup. "I'm hit! I'm hit!" A second Y-wing exploded in a ball of vaporized metal, scattering a few solid shards of debris across the trench. This second loss proved too much even for Red 5 to take. He manipulated controls, and his ship commenced rising in a slow curve out of the trench. Behind him, the lead Imperial fighter moved to follow. "Red 5 to Blue Leader," he reported. "Aborting run, under heavy fire. TIE fighters dropped on us out of nowhere. I can't wait." Astern, a silent, remorseless energy was touching a deadly button once more. The first bolt struck just as Pops had risen high enough to commence evasive action, but he had pulled clear a few seconds too late. One energy beam seared his port engine, igniting gas within. The engine blew apart, taking controls and stabilizing elements with it. Unable to compensate, the out-of-control Y-wing began a long, graceful plunge toward the station's surface. "Are you all right, Red 5? A troubled voice called over the intership system. "Lost Tyree, lost Dutch," Pops explained slowly, tiredly. "They drop in behind you. You can't maneuver in the trench. Sorry, it's your baby now. So long, Dave." It was the last message of many from a veteran. Blue Leader forced a crispness he didn't feel into his voice as he tried to shunt aside the death of his old friend. "Blue boys, this is Blue Leader. Rendezvous at Mark 6.1. All wings, report in." "Blue Leader, this is Blue 10, I copy." "Blue 2 here," Wedge acknowledged. "Coming toward you, Blue Leader." Luke was also waiting his turn to report when something beeped out of his control board. A glance backward confirmed the electronic warning as he spotted an Imperial fighter slipping in behind him. "This is Blue 5, he declared, his ship wobbling as he tried to lose the TIE fighter. "I have a problem here. Be right with you." He sent his ship into a steep dive toward the metal surface, then cut sharply up to avoid a burst of defensive fire from emplacements below. Neither maneuver shook his pursuit. "I see you, Luke," came a reassuring call from Biggs. "Stay with it." Luke looked below, and to the sides, but there was no sign of his friend. Meanwhile, energy bolts from his trailing assailant were passing uncomfortably close. "Blast it, Biggs! Where are you?" Something appeared not to the sides or behind, but almost directly in front of him. It was bright and moving incredibly fast, and then it was firing just above him. Taken completely by surprise, the Imperial fighter came apart just as its pilot realized what happened. Luke turned for the rendezvous mark as Biggs shot past overhead. Good move, Biggs. Fooled me, too. I'm just getting started, his friend announced as he twisted his ship violently to avoid the fire from below. He hove into view over Luke's shoulder and executed a victory roll. Just point me at the target. Back alongside Yavin's indifferent bulk, Dodonna finished an intense discussion with several of his principal advisors, then moved to the long-range transmitter. Blue Leader, this is Base. Base 1. Double-check your own attack prior to commencement. Have your wingmen hold back and cover you. Keep half your group at your range to make the next run. Copy, Base 1, the response came. Blue 10, Blue 12, join with me. 2 ships leveled off to flank the squadron commander. Blue Leader checked them out. Satisfied that they were positioned properly for the attack run, he set the group to follow in case they should fail. Blue 5, this is Blue Leader. Luke, take Blue 2 and 3 with you. Hold up here out of their fire and wait for my signal to start your own run. Copy, Blue Leader, Luke acknowledged, trying to slow his heart steadily. May the Force be with you, Biggs. Wedge, let's close it up. Together, the 3 fighters assumed a tight formation high above the firefight still raging between other rebel craft of green and yellow squadrons and their Imperial gunners below. The horizon flip-flopped ahead of Blue Leader as he commenced his approach to the station's surface. Blue 10, Blue 12, stay back until we spot those fighters, then cover me. All 3 X-Wings reached the surface, leveled off, then arched into the trench. His wingmen dropped farther and farther behind until Blue Leader was seemingly alone in the vast gray chasm. No defensive fire greeted him as he raced toward the distant target. He found himself looking around nervously, checking and rechecking the same instruments. This doesn't look right, he found himself muttering. Blue 10 sounded equally concerned. You should be able to pick up the target by now. I know, the disruption down here is unbelievable. I think my instruments are off. Is this the right trench? Suddenly, intense streaks of light began to shoot close by as the trench defenses opened up. Near misses shook the attackers. At the far end of the trench, a huge tower dominated the metal ridge, vomiting enormous amounts of energy at the nearing ships. It's not going to be easy with that tower up there, Blue Leader declared grimly. Stand by to close up a little when I tell you. Abruptly, the energy bolt ceased, and all was silent and dark in the trench again. This is it, Blue Leader announced, trying to locate the attack from above that had to be coming. Keep your eyes open for those fighters. All short and long-range scopes are blank, Blue 10 reported tensely. Too much interference here. Blue 5, can you see them from where you are? Luke's attention was riveted to the surface of the station. No sign of... Wait! 3 rapidly moving points of light caught his eye. There they are, coming in 0.35. Blue 10 turned and looked in the indicated direction. Sun bounced off stabilizing fins as the TIE fighters looped down toward them. I see them. It's the right trench, all right, Blue Leader exclaimed as his tracking scope suddenly began a steady beeping. He adjusted his targeting instrumentation, pulling his visor down over his eyes. I'm almost in range. Target's ready. Coming up. Just hold them off for me. Just a few seconds. Keep them busy. But Darth Vader was already setting his own fire control as he dropped like a stone toward the trench.
Close up the formation. I'll take them myself.
Blue 12 went first, both engines blown. A slight deviation in flight path, and his ship slammed into the trench wall. Blue 10 slowed and accelerated, bobbed drunkenly, but could do little within the confines of these metal walls. I can't hold them long! You'd better fire while you can. Blue Leader, we're closing in on you. The squadron commander was wholly absorbed in lining up 2 circles within his targeting visor. We're almost home. Steady, steady. Blue 10 glanced around frantically. They're right behind me! Blue Leader was amazed at how calm he was. The targeting device was partly responsible, enabling him to concentrate on a tiny, abstract images to the exclusion of all else, helping him to shut out the rest of the universe. Almost there, he whispered. Then the 2 circles matched, turned red, and a steady buzzing sounded in his helmet. Torpedoes away! Torpedoes away! Immediately after, Blue 10 let his own missiles loose. Both fighters pulled up sharply, just clearing the end of the trench as several explosions billowed in their wake. It's a hit! We've done it! Blue 10 shouted hysterically. Blue Leader's reply was thick with disappointment. No, we haven't. They didn't go in. They just exploded on the surface outside of the shaft. Disappointment killed them, too, as they neglected to watch behind them. 3 pursuing Imperial fighters continued up and out of the fading light from the torpedo explosions. Blue 10 felt Vader's precision fire. Then, the Dark Lord changed course slightly to fall in behind the squadron leader.
I'll take the last one,
he announced coldly.
You two, go back.
Luke was trying to pick the assault team out of the glowing gases below when Blue Leader's voice sounded over the communicator. Blue 5, this is Blue Leader. Move into position, Luke. Start your attack run. Stay low and wait until you're right on top of it. It's not going to be easy. Are you all right? They're on top of me, but I'll shake them. Blue 5 to Blue Pack, Luke ordered. Let's go. The 3 ships peeled off and plunged toward the trench sector. Meanwhile, Vader finally succeeded in hitting his quarry. A glancing bolt that nonetheless started small, intense explosions in one engine. Its R2 unit scrambled back toward the damaged wing and struggled to repair the crippled power plant. R2, shut off the main feed to number 1 starboard engine, Blue Leader directed quietly, staring resignedly at instruments which were running impossibilities. Hang on tight. This could get rough. Luke saw that Blue Leader was in trouble. We're right above you, Blue Leader, he declared. Turn to .05 and we'll cover you. I've lost my upper starboard engine, came the reply. We'll come down for you. Negative, negative. Stay there and get set for your attack run. You're sure you're all right? I think so. Stand by for a minute. Actually, it was somewhat less than a minute before Blue Leader's gyrating X-Wing plowed into the surface of the station. Luke watched the huge explosion dissipate below him, knowing without question its cause, sensing fully for the first time the helplessness of his situation. We lost Blue Leader, he murmured, absently, not particularly caring if his mic picked up the somber announcement. On Yavin 4, Leia Organa rose from her chair and nervously began pacing the room. Normally perfect nails were now jagged and uneven from the nervous chewing. It was the only indication of physical unease. The anxiety visible in her expression was far more revealing for her feelings, an anxiety and worry that filled the war room on the announcement of Blue Leader's death. Can they go on? She finally asked Dodonna. The general replied with gentle resolve. They must. But we've lost so many. Without Blue or Red Leader, how will they regroup? Dodonna was about to reply, but held his words as more critical ones sounded over the speakers. Close it up, Wedge, Luke was saying, thousands of kilometers away. Biggs, where are you? Coming in right behind you, Wedge replied soon after. Okay, boss, we're in position. Dodonna's gaze went to Leia. He looked concerned. The 3 X-Wings moved close together high above the battle station's surface. Luke studied his instrumentation and fought irritably with one control that appeared to be malfunctioning. Ooh, malfunctioning controls. What could it be? Let's find out after we flip the record. All right, I've gone ahead and lost my spot. Here we go. Luke studied his instruments and fought irritability with one control that appeared to be malfunctioning. Someone's voice sounded in his ears. It was a young, old voice, a familiar voice, calm, content, and confident, and reassuring. A voice he had listened to intently on the desert of Tatooine and in the guts of the station below once upon a time.
Trust your feelings, Luke.
Was all the Kenobi-like voice said. Luke tapped his helmet, unsure whether he had heard anything or not. This was no time for introspection. The steely horizon of the station tilted behind him. Wedge, Biggs, we're going in, he told his wingmen. We'll go in full speed. Never mind finding the trench and then accelerating. Maybe that will keep those fighters far enough behind. We'll stay far enough back to cover you, Biggs declared. At that speed, will you be able to pull out in time? Are you kidding? Luke sneered playfully as they began their dive toward the surface. It'll be just like Beggar's Canyon back home. I'm right with you, boss, noted Wedge, emphasizing the title of Luke for the first time. Let's go. At high speed, the three slim fighters charged the glowing surface, pulling out after the last moment. Luke skimmed so close over the station hull that the tip of one of his wings grazed a protruding antenna, sending metal splinters flying. Instantly, they were enveloped in a meshwork of energy bolts and explosive projectiles. It intensified as they dropped down into the trench. We seem to have upset them, Biggs chortled, treating the deadly display of energy as though it were a show being put on for their amusement. This is fine, Luke commented, surprised at the clear view ahead. I can see everything. Wedge wasn't quite as confident as he studied his own readouts. My scope shows the tower, but I can't make out the exhaust port. It must be awfully small. Are you sure the computer can target it? It better, Biggs muttered. Luke didn't offer an evaluation. He was too busy holding course through the turbulence produced by exploding bolts. Then, as if on command, the defensive fire ceased. He glanced around and up for signs of the expected TIE fighters, but saw nothing. His hand went to the top of his targeting visor. His hand went to drop the targeting visor into position, and just for a moment he hesitated. Then he swung it down in front of his eyes. Watch yourselves, he ordered his companions. What about that tower? Wedge asked worriedly. You worry about those fighters, Luke snapped. I'll worry about the tower. They rushed on, closing on the target, every second. Wedge stared up and around, and his gaze suddenly froze. Here they come, 0.3. Vader was setting his controls when one of his wingmen broke attack silence. They're making their attack too fast. They'll never get out in time.
Stay with them,
Vader commanded. They're going too fast. To get a fix, his other pilot announced certainly. Vader studied several readouts and found that his sensors confirmed the other estimates.
They'll still have to slow down before they reach that tower.
Luke contemplated the view in his targeting visor. Almost home. Seconds passed, and the twin circlets achieved congruence. His finger convulsed on the firing control. Torpedoes away! Pull up! Two powerful explosions rocked the trench, striking harmlessly far to one side of the minute opening. 3 TIE fighters shot out of the rapidly dissipating fireball, closing on the retreating rebels.
Take them,
Vader ordered softly. Luke detected the pursuit at the same time as his companions. Wedge, Biggs, split up. It's the only way we'll shake them. The 3 ships dropped toward the station, then abruptly raced off in 3 different directions. All 3 TIE fighters turned and followed Luke. Vader fired on the crazily dodging ship, missed, and frowned to himself.
The Force is strong with this one. Strange. I'll take him myself.
Luke darted between defensive towers and wove a tight path around projecting docking bays, all to no avail. A single remaining TIE fighter stayed close behind. An energy bolt nicked one wing, close by an engine. It started to spark irregularly, threateningly. Luke fought to compensate and retain control. Still trying to shake his persistent assailant, he dropped back into the trench again. I'm hit, he announced, but not too bad. R2, see what you can do about it. The tiny droid unlocked himself and moved to work on the damaged engine as energy bolts flashed by dangerously close. Hang on back there, Luke counseled the R2 unit as he worked a path toward the projecting towers. The fighter spinning and twisting tightly through the topography of the station. Fire remained intense as Luke randomly changed direction in speed. A series of indicators on the control panel slowly changed color. 3 vital gauges relaxed and returned to where they belonged. I think you've got it, R2, Luke told him gleefully. I think that's it. Just try to lock it down so it can't work itself loose again. R2 beeped in reply while Luke studied the whirling panorama behind him and above him. I think we've lost those fighters, too. Blue Group, this is Blue 5. Are you clear? He manipulated several controls, and the X-Wing shot out of the trench, and still followed by emplacement fire. I'm up here waiting, boss, Wedge announced from his position high above the station. I can't see you. I'm on my way, Blue 3. Are you clear, Biggs? I've had some trouble, his friend explained, but I think I lost him. Something showed again, damnably, on Biggs' screen. A glance behind showed the TIE fighter that had been chasing him for the past several minutes, dropping in once more and behind him. He swung down toward the station again. Nope, not yet, Biggs told the others. Hold on, Luke. I'll be right there. A thin mechanical voice sounded over the speakers. Hang on, R2, hang on. Back at the temple headquarters, 3PO turned away from the curious human faces, which turned to stare at him. As Luke stared high above the station, another X-Wing swung in close to him. He recognized Wedge's ship and began hunting around anxiously for his friend. We're going in. Biggs, join up. Biggs, are you all right? Biggs! There was no sign of the other fighter. Wedge, do you see him anywhere? With the transparent canopy of the fighter bobbing close by, a helmet head shook slowly. Nothing, Wedge told him over the communicator. Wait a little longer. He'll show. Luke looked around, worried, studied several instruments, then came to a decision. We can't wait. We've got to go now. I don't think he made it. Hey, you guys, a cheerful voice demanded to know. What are you waiting for? Luke turned sharply to his right, in time to see another ship racing past and slowly slightly ahead of him. Don't ever give up on old Biggs, the intercom directed as the figure in the X-Wing ahead looked back at them. Within the control room of the battle station, a harried officer rushed up to a figure studying the great battle screen and waved a handful of printouts at him. Sir, we've completed an analysis of their attack plan. There is a danger. Should we break off the engagement and make plans to evacuate? Your ship is standing by. Governor Tarkin turned an incredulous gaze on the officer, who shrank back. Evacuate? He roared. At our moment of triumph? We are about to destroy the last remnants of the Alliance, and you call for evacuation? You overestimate their chances badly. Now get out! Overwhelmed by the governor's fury, the subdued officer turned and retreated from the room. We're going in, Luke declared as he commenced his dive toward the surface. Wedge and Biggs followed just aft. Let's go, Luke. A voice he had heard before sounded inside his head. Again, he tapped his helmet and looked around. It sounded as if the speaker were standing just behind him, but there was nothing, only silent metal and nonverbal instrumentation. Puzzled, Luke turned back to his controls. Once more, energy bolts reached out for them, passing harmlessly on both sides of the surface of the battle station as they charged up toward his face. But the defensive fire wasn't the cause of the renewed trembling Luke suddenly experienced. Several critical gauges were beginning their swing back into the danger zone again. He leaned toward the pickup. R2, those stabilizing elements must have broken loose again. See if you can't lock it down. I've got to have full control. Ignoring the bumpy ride, the energy beams and explosions lighting space around him, the little robot moved to repair the damage. Additional tireless explosions continued to buffet the 3 fighters as they dropped into the trench. Biggs and Wedge dropped behind to cover for Luke as he reached to pull down the targeting visor. For the second time, A peculiar hesitation swept through him. His hand was slower, yet as he finally pulled the device down in front of his eyes, almost as if the nerves were in conflict with one another. As expected, the energy beam stopped, as if on signal, and he was barreling down toward the trench unchallenged. Here we go again, Wedge declared as he spotted 3 Imperial fighters dropping down on them. Biggs and Wedge began crossing behind Luke, trying to draw the coming fire away from him and confuse their pursuers. One TIE fighter ignored the maneuvers, continuing to gain inexorably on the rebel ships. Luke stared into the targeting device, then reached up slowly to move it aside. For a long minute, he pondered the deactivated instrument, staring at it as if hypnotized. Then he slid it sharply back in front of his face and studied the tiny screen as it displayed the shifting relationship of the X-Wing to the nearby exhaust port. Hurry, Luke, Biggs called out as he wrenched his ship in time to narrowly avoid a powerful beam. They're coming in faster this time. We can't hold them much longer. With inhuman precision, Darth Vader depressed the fire control of his fighter again. A loud, desperate shout sounded over the speakers, blending into a final agonized scream of flesh and metal as Biggs's fighter burst into a billion glowing splinters that rained down on the bottom of the trench. Wedge heard the explosion over his speakers and hunted frantically behind him for the trailing enemy ships. We lost Biggs! He yelled toward his own pickup. Luke didn't reply immediately. His eyes were watering, and he angrily wiped them clear. They were blurring his view of the target readout. We're a couple of shooting stars, Biggs, he whispered huskily, and we'll never be stopped. His ship rocked slightly from a near miss, and he directed his words to his remaining wingman, biting down hard on the end of each sentence. Close it up, Wedge. You can't do any more good back there. R2, try to give me a little more power on the rear reflectors. The R2 unit hurried to comply as Wedge pulled up alongside Luke's ship. The trailing TIE Fighters also increased their speed.
I'm on the leader,
Vader informed his soldiers.
Take the other one.
Luke flew just in front of Wedge, slightly to port side. Energy bolts from the pursuing Imperials began to streak close about them. Both men crossed each other's path repeatedly, striving to present as confusing a target as possible. Wedge was fighting with his controls when several small flashes and sparks lit his control board. One small panel exploded, leaving molten slag behind. Somehow, he managed to regain control of his ship. I've got a bad malfunction, Luke. I can't stay with you. Okay, Wedge, get clear. Wedge mumbled a heartfelt, sorry, and peeled out of the trench. Vader, concentrating his attention on the one ship remaining before him, fired. Luke didn't see the near-lethal explosions which burst close behind him. Nor did he have time to examine the smoking shell of twisted metal, which now rode alongside one engine. The arms went limp on the little droid. All 3 TIE fighters continued to chase the remaining X-Wing down the trench. It was only a matter of moments before one of them caught the bobbing fighter with a crippling burst. Except now, there were only 2 Imperials pursuing. The third had become an expanding cylinder of decomposing debris, bits and pieces of which slammed into the walls of the canyon. Vader's remaining wingman looked around in panic for the source of the attack. The same distortion fields that confused Rebel instrumentation now did likewise to the 2 TIE fighters. Only when the freighter fully eclipsed the sun forward did the new threat become visible. It was a Corellian transport, far larger than any fighter, and it was diving directly at the trench. But it didn't move precisely like a freighter somehow. Whoever was piloting that vehicle must have been unconscious or out of his mind, the wingman decided. Wildly, he adjusted controls in an attempt to avoid the anticipated collision. The freighter swept by just overhead, but in missing it, the wingman slid too far to one side. A small explosion followed as 2 huge fins of the paralleling TIE fighters intersected. Screaming uselessly into his pickup, the wingman fluttered toward the near trench wall. He never touched it, his ship erupting in flame before contact. To the other side, Darth Vader's fighter began spinning helplessly. Unimpressed by the Dark Lord's desperate glower, various controls and instruments gave back readings which were brutally truthful. Completely out of control, the tiny ship continued spinning in the opposite direction from the destroyed wingman, out into the endless reaches of deep space. Whoever was at the controls of the supple freighter was neither unconscious nor insane. Well, perhaps slightly touched, but fully in command nonetheless. It soared high above the trench, turning to run protectively above Luke. You're all clear, kid, a familiar voice informed him. Now blow this thing so we can all go home. This pep talk was followed by a reinforcing grunt, which could only have been produced by a particularly large Wookiee. Luke looked up through the canopy and smiled, but his smile faded as he turned back to the targeting visor. There was a tickling inside his head.
Luke, trust me,
the tickle requested. Forming words for the third time, he stared into the targeter. The emergency exhaust port was sliding toward the firing circle once again, as it had once before, when he had missed. He hesitated, but only briefly this time, then shoved the targeting screen aside. Closing his eyes, he appeared to mumble to himself, as if in internal conversation with something unseen. With the confidence of a blind man in familiar surroundings, Luke moved a thumb over several controls, then touched one. Soon after, a concerned voice filled the cockpit from the open speakers. Base 1 to Blue 5. Your targeting device is switched off. What's wrong? Nothing, Luke murmured, barely audible. Nothing. He blinked and cleared his eyes. Had he been asleep? Looking around, he saw that he was out of the trench and shooting back into opening space. A glance outside showed the familiar shape of Han Solo's ship shadowing him. Another at the control board indicated that he had released his remaining torpedoes, although he couldn't even remember touching the firing stud. Still, he must have. The cockpit speakers were alive with excitement. You did it! You did it! Wedge was shouting over and over again. I think they went right in. Good shot, kid, Solo complimented him, having to raise his voice to be heard over Chewbacca's unrestrained howling. Distant, muted rumblings shook Luke's ship. As one of the men, incipient with success, he must have fired the torpedoes, mustn't he? Gradually, he regained his composure. Glad you were here to see it. Now let's get some distance between us and that thing before it goes. I hope Wedge is all right. And I hope he was right. Several X-Wings, Y-Wings, and one battered-looking freighter accelerated away from the battle station, racing toward the distant curve of Yavin. Behind them, small flashes of fading light marked the receding station. Without warning, something appeared in the sky in the place of it, which was brighter than the glowing gas giant, brighter than its far-off sun. For a few seconds, the eternal night became day. No one dared look directly at it. Not even multiple shields set on high could dim that awesome flare. Space filled temporarily with trillions of microscopic metal fragments, propelled past the retreating ships by the liberated energy of a small artificial sun. The collapsed residue of the battle station would continue to consume itself for several days, forming, for that brief span of time, the most impressive tombstone in this corner of the cosmos. And that concludes Chapter 13. And our record's over, but there is only 2 pages left. So I'm just going to put a little more music on and finish this puppy. I think we've got a award ceremony in front of us. Let's see. A cheering, gleeful throng of technicians, mechanics, and other inhabitants of the Alliance headquarters swarmed around each fighter as it touched down and taxied into the temple hangar. Several of the other surviving pilots had already vacated their ships and were waiting to greet Luke. On the opposite side of the fighter, the crowd was far smaller and more restrained. It consisted of a couple of technicians and one tall humanoid droid who watched worriedly as the humans mounted the scorched fighter and lifted a badly burned metal hulk from its back.
Oh my, R2!
3PO pleaded, bending close to the carbonized robot.
Can you hear me? Say something!
His unwinking gaze turned to one of the techs.
You can repair him, can't you?
We'll do our best. The man studied the vaporized metal, the dangling components. He's taken a terrible beating.
You must repair him, sir. If any of my circuits or modules will help, I'll gladly donate them.
They moved away slowly, oblivious to the noise and excitement around them. Between robots and the humans who repaired them, there existed a very special relationship. Each partook a little of the other, and sometimes the dividing line between man and machine was more blurred than many would like to admit. The center of the carnival atmosphere was formed by three figures who battled to see who could compliment the others the most. When it came to congratulatory backslapping, however, Chewbacca won by default. There was laughter as the Wookiee looked embarrassed at having nearly flattened Luke in his eagerness to greet him. "I knew you'd come back," Luke was shouting. I just knew it. I would have been nothing but dust if you hadn't sailed in like that, Han." Solo had lost none of his smug self-assurance. "Well, I couldn't very well let a flying farm boy go up against that station all by himself. Besides, I was beginning to realize that what could happen, and I felt terrible about it, Luke. Leaving you to maybe take all the credit for getting all the reward." As they laughed, a lithe figure, robes flowing, rushed up to Luke in a very unsenatorial fashion. "You did it, Luke! You did it!" Leia was shouting. She fell into his arms and hugged him as he spun her around. Then she moved to Solo and repeated the embrace. Expectantly, the Corellian was not quite as embarrassed. Suddenly, awed by the adulation of the crowd, Luke turned away. He gave the tired fighter a look of approval, then found his gaze traveling upward, up to the ceiling high overhead. For a second, he thought he heard something faintly, like a gratified sigh, the relaxing of muscles a crazy old man had once performed in moments of pleasure. Of course, it was probably the intruding hot wind of a steaming jungle world, but Luke smiled anyway at what he thought he saw up there. There were many rooms in the vast expanse of the temple, which had been converted for modern service by the technicians of the Alliance. Even in their desperate need, however, there was something too clean and classically beautiful about the ruins of the ancient throne room for the architects to modify. They had left it as it was, save for scouring it clear of creeping jungle growth and debris. For the first time in thousands of years, that spacious chamber was full. Hundreds of rebel troops and technicians stood assembled on the old stone floor, gathered together for one last time before dispersing to new posts in distant homes. For the first time ever, the massed ranks of pressed uniforms and polished semi-armor stood arrayed together in a fitting show of Alliance might. The banners of the many worlds which had lent support to the rebellion fluttered in the gentle breeze formed inside. At the far end of a long open aisle stood a vision gowned in formal white, barred with Chilectoni waves. Leia Organa's signet of office. Several figures appeared at the far end of the aisle. One massive and hero suite showed signs of running for cover, but was urged on down the open row by his companion. It took several minutes for Luke, Han, Chewie, and 3PO to cover the distance to the other end. They stood before Leia, and Luke recognized General Dodonna among the other dignitaries seated nearby. There was a pause and a gleaming familiar R2 unit joined the group, moving to stand next to a thoroughly awestruck 3PO. Chewbacca shuffled nervously, giving every indication of wishing he was someplace else. Solo silenced him as Leia rose and came forward. At the same time, banners tilted in unison, and all those gathered in the great hall turned to face the dais. She placed something heavy and golden around Solo's neck, then Chewbacca's, having to strain to do so, and finally around Luke's. Then she made a signal to the crowd, and the rigid discipline dissolved, as every man, woman, and mechanical present was permitted to give full vent to their feelings. As he stood awash in the cheers and shouts, Luke found that his mind was neither on his possible future with the Alliance, nor on the chance of traveling adventurously with Han Solo and Chewbacca. Instead, unlikely as Solo had claimed it might be, he found his full attention occupied by the radiant Leia Organa. She noticed his unabashed stare, but this time she only smiled. The end. Well, we did it, folks. My Instagram feed, which is limited to an hour, just ended, so I guess I owe an apology to those people. But thank you all for watching.